Every great empire in history has eventually crumbled. Dynasties fall, armies are defeated, borders disappear. But for over 200 years, one name kept appearing at the center of every single collapse. Every war, every financial crash, every political earthquake that shook the world. The Rothschilds, a single banking family, supposedly operating from the shadows while governments burned and ordinary people lost everything. But here is the question that nobody asks. Did they actually have that much power? Or have we turned a real family into a convenient myth? Because we desperately need someone to blame when the world stops making sense? The answer is far more disturbing than any conspiracy theory, and it starts in the most chaotic period Europe had ever seen. The year is 1800. Napoleon Bonaparte is tearing Europe apart. Borders are shifting every few months. Armies are constantly on the move, and armies need money, enormous sums of it, just to keep fighting. But here was the nightmare nobody talks about. Moving that money was nearly impossible. Back then, wealth wasn't digital. It wasn't paper. Wealth was gold and silver, physically loaded onto locked wagons, transported under armed escort across roads that could become impassable overnight after a battle or a storm. Couriers disappeared. Entire military campaigns stalled, not because of enemy forces, but because the money simply never arrived. This was the broken, chaotic world that one modest banking family from Frankfurt decided to solve. The Rothschilds did something no one else had done before. They built a private financial network, stretching across London, Paris, Frankfurt, Vienna, and Naples simultaneously. This network used private couriers, coded communications, and financial agreements that allowed money to move across borders without physically transporting the gold every single time. And then something remarkable happened. Their network started moving money and information faster than governments, faster than armies, faster than anyone else on the continent. Governments could access credit before rivals knew what was happening. Markets shifted, military campaigns changed. All before most of Europe had any idea circumstances had already changed. And then came Waterloo, and nothing would ever be the same again. June 1815. Napoleon's fate is being decided on a muddy battlefield in Belgium. All of London is waiting, anxious, uncertain. The future of Europe hanging on a single day. Nathan Rothschild, operating in London, reportedly received news of Napoleon's defeat hours before the rest of the city had any idea what had happened. And what he did next became one of the most famous and most debated financial stories in modern history. Now, here is where the story splits into two very different versions, and both of them matter. According to the legend that would spread across Europe, Nathan entered the bond market and started selling, behaving as though Britain had lost. Panic spread instantly. Investors, seeing the Rothschilds selling, concluded the worst. They dumped government bonds in a frenzy. Prices collapsed. And then, at the very bottom of the crash, the Rothschilds bought everything back at a fraction of the original price. By the time the real news broke and confidence returned, ordinary investors had been wiped out. The Rothschilds had multiplied their fortune. That story spread like fire across pamphlets, newspapers, and political speeches for the next century. The reality? Nathan Rothschild did receive early intelligence and did profit significantly from Waterloo. But the dramatic manipulation story was almost certainly exaggerated. What actually happened was aggressive, well-informed trading using an information advantage that most people simply did not have. But here is what matters. The legend was already more powerful than the truth. And legends, once they take hold, are almost impossible to stop. Here is something that almost nobody explains when they talk about Rothschild conspiracy theories. The myth did not emerge from nowhere. It was produced by a world that was being violently transformed, and that transformation terrified people. After the Napoleonic Wars, Europe industrialized at a speed no civilization had ever experienced. Railroads carved through the countryside. Factory cities exploded overnight. Stock markets pulled enormous amounts of money from ordinary investors into risky, unfamiliar industries. And then, with almost no warning, the crashes started. Banks failed. Businesses that looked stable on Monday were gone by Friday. Workers arrived at factory gates to find them locked. Wages vanished overnight. Families who believed they had built something secure suddenly had nothing. And the most frightening part? Nobody could explain why. Financial power had become invisible. In earlier generations, wealth was something you could see. Land behind gates, ships arriving at port, factories filling the skyline with smoke. You could point at it. You knew who controlled things. But now, wealth moved through bond markets and paper agreements. Entire fortunes appeared and disappeared through transactions that ordinary people never witnessed and could never understand. Jobs in one city disappeared because of financial decisions made in a city thousands of miles away. Environments like that always produce the same psychological response. When people cannot understand a system, they invent someone to blame for it. In 1846, a French writer named Matthew Georges d'Anvers, publishing under the pseudonym Satan, released a pamphlet that would become one of the most dangerous documents of the 19th century. It took every fear people were living through, the mysterious crashes, the invisible financial power, the jobs disappearing without explanation, and compressed it all into a single, emotionally devastating idea. One family, secretly manipulating everything, above governments, above law, above ordinary human accountability. That was the turning point. Slowly, people stopped seeing finance as a chaotic, unpredictable system driven by wars, speculation, and industrial expansion. Instead, all of it started to look intentional, coordinated, evil, and Europe was already carrying deep anti-Semitic hatred long before any of this. Financial panic did not create that hatred, but it gave it new fuel and a new, specific target. The story spread. Each retelling made it bigger, more detailed, more emotionally convincing. Repetition gave mythology the weight of historical fact. And with every generation, the story adapted, attaching itself to whatever people feared most at that particular moment in time. By the late 19th century, nationalist movements across Europe were weaponizing this mythology. A family operating simultaneously through London, Paris, Vienna, Frankfurt, and Naples, crossing national borders as easily as ordinary people cross streets, became a perfect target for movements obsessed with national loyalty and foreign influence. Different political movements adapted the story for their own purposes. Nationalists used it to attack international finance. Populists redirected public rage at financial elites during economic crises. Radical movements portrayed international banking as a secret network loyal only to itself, with no allegiance to any nation or any ordinary citizen. And then, in 1940, Nazi Germany took that mythology and turned it into something monstrous. A propaganda film, Die Rothschilds, presented the family as shadowy financiers exploiting war and human suffering for profit, while nations collapsed around them. This was not presented as fiction. It was designed to feel like historical documentary. Audiences watched crowded trading floors, secret meetings, and manufactured financial panic unfold, as though they were witnessing real, verified history. Cinema changed the scale of what propaganda could do. Where earlier generations encountered conspiracy theories through pamphlets and word of mouth, entire populations could now watch their fears presented as undeniable visual truth. And, when the war ended, the stories did not disappear. They resurfaced through books, fringe political movements, radio programs, documentaries, and eventually, the internet. And then social media accelerated everything. So, here is the question we actually have to answer. Is it all just conspiracy theories? Or is there real truth buried inside the mythology? The honest answer is both. And that nuance is exactly what makes this story so difficult to tell. The Rothschilds were genuinely powerful. Nathan did receive early intelligence about Waterloo and used it aggressively in the bond markets. The family did earn enormous profits financing governments on both sides of major European wars. Their banks did appear repeatedly around railway expansion, mining projects, and massive state financing deals across the continent. And their network did operate with unusual secrecy, private couriers, confidential agreements, negotiations conducted quietly between bankers and government officials, far from any public view. And ordinary people were genuinely suffering during this same period. Speculative crashes spread repeatedly through the economy. Workers lost everything. savings disappeared. Local businesses collapsed, while major financial institutions often survived, with far less damage than anyone below them. So, no, the Rothschilds were not innocent bystanders. Their power was real. Their influence was real. Their profits from instability were real. But here is what the conspiracy theory gets catastrophically wrong. It takes a real story of concentrated financial power and transforms it into something else entirely. A supernatural, all-controlling hidden hand that orchestrates every disaster on Earth. That transformation is where historical grievance ends and dangerous mythology begins. Because once a complex system gets reduced to a single villain, once people believe that one family secretly controls everything, there is no longer any need to understand how financial systems actually work. No need to examine how governments borrow and spend. No need to question how markets concentrate power. Everything becomes simple. Everything becomes someone else's fault. And that simplicity has historically been one of the most dangerous forces in human civilization. The Rothschild name eventually became completely detached from the actual family. It transformed into a floating symbol, something people could attach to whatever hidden power frightened them most at any given moment. Central banks, globalization, immigration, financial crisis. It no longer needed to be accurate. It just needed to feel true. And that is perhaps the most unsettling lesson from this entire story. The conspiracy theory about the Rothschilds was never really about the Rothschilds. It was always about us, about how human beings respond when the world changes too fast, when power becomes invisible, and when fear needs somewhere to go. If you made it this far, drop an upside-down smiley in the comments. That is how I know who actually stayed until the end. And if you found this video valuable, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. It genuinely helps this channel more than you know. I will see you on the next one.